Hello, everybody. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday. Um, I'm wearing my Toxic Holocaust shirt. I got this yesterday. It arrived in the post. I think Toxic Holocaust are brilliant. I really liked their last album. I think it was very underrated. I hope they do a new album soon. But you didn't come here to listen to me talking about metal, did you? No. So this video is not specifically about accents. My guess is that if you are trying to develop a Porsche accent, your aspiration is to seem more cultured, to seem more sophisticated, to seem like an educated person, somebody who knows about things, who knows about the world. And I would suggest to you that one of the ways you can do that is by reading the newspaper every day. When I was at university, a friend of mine, another student, he was amazed at my level of general knowledge about how I seem to know about almost every single subject. And he asked me how he could gain that kind of knowledge. And I said to him, well, you should read the Times newspaper every day. To be honest, I think probably, in fairness, my general knowledge was probably more down to the fact that when I was a child, I used to spend long hours reading the Encyclopedia Britannica at home. I would just read article after article on all sorts of different subjects. But I do think that reading the newspapers contributed to my knowledge of the world. My parents, they used to get the newspaper every day, that it was delivered to them. Sometimes they would get the Telegraph, the Independent sometimes, also the Times, and I would read it every day without fail. Sometimes my parents got a bit annoyed with me because I read it before they did, which I suppose is fair enough, seeing as they were paying for it. And when I went to do my A levels at sixth form, I used to read a different newspaper in the college library every day. I'd read my parents' newspaper at home, and then I'd read a different newspaper in the lunch break at college. And I carried on that habit when I went to university. In the university library, I would read the Times newspaper or a different newspaper every single day. And that was a really important ritual for me at the time. I remember very vividly when I was doing my A level some of the stories that were in the news at the time, and I suppose those things have shaped me an awful lot, those stories about the peace process in Northern Ireland, about debates about Tony Blair's economic policies, debates about Europe. I read in the newspapers about the genocide in Kosovo and the NATO response to it. At the time I was doing my A-levels, I became a huge fan of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And it seemed to me that a lot of the same things on the show about Bajor and the Federation and Cardassia, these were so similar to some of the things that I was reading about in the newspapers every day. And reading the newspaper had a huge impact on my way of thinking about the world. So as a teenager, for quite a while I was a pacifist. But then also I read in the newspaper all these stories about Saddam Hussein and the terrible things he was doing and his plans to get hold of a nuclear bomb. And it absolutely terrified me, the thought that Saddam Hussein could start World War III in the Middle East. So, although I'd been a pacifist, I was very relieved when the United States and the UK launched airstrikes, Operation Desert Fox, in 1999, the airstrikes on Iraq. It was a great relief to me. Even though I was a pacifist and probably wasn't inclined to support dropping bombs, it seemed like actually that was the right thing to do in keeping the world safe. So I moved in perhaps more of a hawkish direction, maybe slightly militaristic on defence matters. And when the Iraq War happened years later, I supported that as well. And I still think that going to war in Iraq was the right thing to do. You may well disagree with me about that. And also, the newspapers shaped my opinions later when I was at university. I had a moment of epiphany one day. I like to think that it was the week that Putin became president of Russia. It was certainly around that time. You see, I was studying cultural studies in the first year of university, and I was exposed to a lot of Marxist theory, and I think I tended to agree with it. I probably would have seen myself as being a Marxist. But then I had this moment of epiphany as I was reading the newspaper and I was reading about Putin and all the other issues and problems in the world, and it occurred to me, this is the real world. This is what's going on. All that stuff about Marxism and theories in the lecture halls, all that was irrelevant, all that was nonsense, all of that was college lecturers with no power or influence or any kind of practical ideas that would really solve the problems in the world. And so, looking at that newspaper that day, I abandoned Marxism. I gradually moved away from the left. That I won't tell you what my particular political stance is these days. It's not really relevant. But the newspapers shaped my own thinking. So I would encourage you, and not just to gain knowledge, but also as an intellectual challenge, to engage in reading newspapers. I think you will benefit enormously. So a newspaper is almost like a snapshot of the world. It's like an encyclopedia almost of like a particular time, because there's stories about your own country, there'll be stories about other countries, there will be stuff about science, about literature, about art, about famous people. There might even be some poetry in it that you can read. There'll be stuff about nature, amazing photography, and there'll be opinion pieces too. You may well agree with them, you may not agree with them, but even if you don't agree with them, they'll sharpen your thinking and expose you to different ideas. You might well say to me, well, okay, yeah, I can see how some of that stuff might be beneficial, Matt, but why can't I get all that stuff from the internet? So I can read the newspaper online, I can read articles from the magazines online, I can read all sorts of blog posts about different subjects, I can read Wikipedia. What I would say to you is that it's actually better to buy a physical newspaper. The reason being that online, the algorithm is basically showing you what you want to see. It's showing you the stuff that you're interested in, the stuff that you agree with. It's basically creating your own little echo chamber. But if you read a newspaper, you don't necessarily have to read every single article in it, but it's being put in front of you. You're being confronted with things that you might not necessarily otherwise have chosen to read. So you will see them, and you can take them or leave them. But they are there and you're being shown them, and that will enable you to learn things that you might not necessarily have read if you were on the internet and just looking and clicking on the stuff that you want to see, or that the algorithm showed you based on your previous searches. So I would very much recommend that you get into the habit of reading physical newspapers. I tend to read either The Guardian or The Telegraph. So when I read The Guardian, I get a left-wing perspective. When I read The Telegraph, I get a right-wing perspective. I won't tell you where I stand these days. You don't really need to know. But I would encourage you also to read different things from different perspectives. Read a left-wing paper, read a right-wing paper. And I would say to you that this will massively increase your general knowledge, it will increase your awareness of the world, and you will come across to other people as being cultured, as being sophisticated, as being an educated person, which I'm sure is what you want to do if you're trying to develop a posh accent. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to me. If you're living in England, I do hope you enjoy the bank holiday tomorrow. Otherwise, have a really fantastic Sunday. Bye-bye.